May 1940, somewhere near Dunkirk, France. British infantry from the Royal West Kent Regiment fix bayonets as German forces close in on their defensive position. The order comes. Fix bayonets. Prepare to charge. 17 inches of sharpened steel click into place on Lee Enfield rifles. These men are about to execute a tactic the modern world considered obsolete, charging machine guns with edged weapons in an age of tanks and aircraft. They charge anyway. German soldiers, veterans of the Polish campaign, who'd faced nothing like this, break and run. The British bayonet, a design from 1907 that should have been museum pieces, has just achieved what bullets couldn't, shattering German morale through sheer psychological terror. What those Germans faced was the pattern 1907 bayonet, a weapon that defied every trend in modern military design. While other nations shortened their bayonets, Britain kept 17 inches of blade. While others adopted multi-purpose tools, Britain maintained a dedicated fighting weapon. While military theorists declared the bayonet obsolete, British soldiers kept fixing them and kept charging. The P1907 wasn't just Britain's standard bayonet through 2 world wars. It was the last true sword bayonet any major military ever issued, and it remained in British service for 50 years because sometimes psychological impact matters more than modern efficiency. The problem facing Britain in 1903 wasn't tactical, but psychological. The British Army needed a bayonet for the new short-magazine Lee Enfield rifle that would replace the Lee Metford. But deeper than simple replacement, British military tradition demanded a weapon that projected empire, inspired confidence in British soldiers, and created fear in enemies. The Victorian-era socket bayonets and earlier patterns lacked the intimidation factor British officers believed essential for colonial warfare and European combat. British military doctrine in the early 20th century emphasized offensive spirit and shock action. The bayonet charge represented the ultimate expression of British fighting will. Officers believed that a long, sword-like bayonet enhanced this psychological effect. A soldier carrying what appeared to be a short sword on his rifle looked more formidable than one carrying a knife. In hand-to-hand combat, reach mattered. In psychological warfare, appearance mattered more. Existing solutions were inadequate for Britain's self-image as a martial empire. Earlier Victorian bayonets were functional but lacked the aggressive appearance British doctrine demanded. Continental European armies were moving toward shorter, knife-style bayonets of 10 to 12 inches. American forces used similar short designs. But British military theorists believed this was a mistake. They argued that long bayonets provided superior reach in close combat and superior psychological impact before combat even began. The sight of British infantry with fixed bayonets should terrify enemies into surrender or flight. What the British Army wanted was a bayonet long enough to provide reach advantage in hand-to-hand fighting, sharp enough to function as a fighting knife when detached, robust enough to serve as a utility tool in the field, and intimidating enough to break enemy morale before contact. What other nations were producing were sensible, modern, short bayonets. Britain wanted something different. The designer was the Enfield Pattern Room, the British military's weapons design facility. The chief designer was unknown to history, lost in bureaucratic records, but the design brief was clear. Create a sword bayonet of approximately 17 inches blade length, compatible with the new SMLE rifle, robust enough for military abuse, and manufacturable in quantities sufficient to arm the entire British Empire. The result was the pattern 1907 bayonet. Development proceeded through 1906 and early 1907. The design borrowed elements from earlier British bayonets, particularly the pattern 1888, but refined the blade profile and attachment system. The demonstration that proved the concept took place at trials where soldiers fought mock combat with padded versions, used the bayonet for utility tasks, and tested durability. The Enfield Pattern Room concluded the design met all requirements. Production authorization came in 1907, hence the official designation. The blade was 17 inches long, an extraordinary length by modern standards. The steel was high carbon, tempered for hardness while maintaining flexibility to prevent brittle breaking. The blade profile was single-edged with a false edge on the back near the point, creating a wicked stabbing point while maintaining cutting capability along the primary edge. The fuller, a groove running along the blade, reduced weight while maintaining strength. Total blade weight was approximately 1 pound. The crossguard was steel, protecting the user's hand in close combat. The grip was 2 pieces of wood or later synthetic material, riveted through the tang. The pommel was steel with a hole for a securing screw. The scabbard was leather or later metal with a steel throat and chap for durability. The attachment system used a muzzle ring that slipped over the rifle barrel and a pommel slot that locked onto the rifle's nose cap lug. Physical specifications revealed a weapon that was genuinely a short sword. Overall length was 22 inches, including the grip. Blade length was 17 inches. Width was approximately 1 inch at the widest point. Weight was 1.3 pounds complete with scabbard. This wasn't a knife. This was a sword that happened to attach to a rifle. Effective reach when mounted on a rifle was approximately 5 feet from the soldier's body to the bayonet point, giving British infantry significant reach advantage in close combat. The revolutionary aspect wasn't technological innovation, but philosophical stubbornness. Every modern military trend pointed towards shorter bayonets. Germany adopted the S-84/98 at 10 inches. France used the Rosalie at 16 inches, but later shortened it. America used the M-1905 at 16 inches, then the M1 at 10 inches. Britain looked at these trends and said no. 17 inches was correct in 1907, and 17 inches would remain correct through 1945 and beyond. This wasn't ignorance of modern trends, it was rejection of them based on British combat experience across the empire. Production began in 1907 at multiple contractors including Wilkinson Sword, Sanderson Brothers, and various Birmingham cutlery firms. By 1914, hundreds of thousands had been produced. During World War I, production ramped up massively, with millions manufactured through 1918. Production continued between the wars and accelerated again during World War II. By 1945, total production exceeded 10 million units. This was mass production of a weapon design other nations considered obsolete. The first major combat use came in World War I, where the P-1907 became legendary. British infantry conducted bayonet charges across no man's land, fixed bayonets in trench raids, and used the long blade in brutal close quarters trench fighting. German soldiers developed particular fear of British bayonet charges. Multiple German accounts describe the terror of seeing British infantry emerge from bombardment with those long bayonets fixed, charging silently or screaming. But World War II provided equally dramatic examples. At Dunkirk in 1940, British rearguard actions included bayonet charges that broke German advances through sheer shock. At El Alamein in 1942, Highland regiments conducted night bayonet attacks that shattered Italian defensive positions. In Burma, from 1943 to 1945, British and Commonwealth forces used bayonet charges against Japanese positions when ammunition ran low or when psychological shock was needed. The most documented World War II bayonet action occurred during the Battle of Singapore in February 1942. The 2nd Battalion Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders conducted a bayonet charge against Japanese positions. Despite being outnumbered, the psychological impact of the charge with fixed bayonets caused Japanese forces to temporarily withdraw. The charge didn't change Singapore's outcome, but demonstrated that even in 1942, the bayonet retained psychological power. If you're finding this deep dive into British infantry weapons and military tradition interesting, subscribing helps the channel and ensures you don't miss the next one. The P-1907 bayonet story reveals how Britain maintained traditions that modern militaries abandoned. For comparison, other nations' bayonets revealed why Britain's choice was so distinctive. The German S-84/98 bayonet was just 10 inches, designed as a multi-purpose tool as much as a weapon. It was sensible, modern, and completely lacked the intimidation factor of the British design. The American M1 bayonet introduced in 1943 was 10 inches, designed for practicality rather than psychological impact. The Soviet SOK bayonet for the Mosin Nagant was crude but functional, emphasizing mass production over appearance. The Japanese Type 30 bayonet was 15.75 inches, nearly matching British length, which contributed to Japanese infantry's fearsome reputation in close combat. The P-1907 uniquely combined extreme length that no other modern military matched, dedicated fighting design with no pretense of being primarily a utility tool, and psychological impact that British doctrine valued above modern efficiency. The achievement was maintaining this design philosophy for 50 years, while the world moved toward shorter, multi-purpose designs. Britain's stubbornness created a weapon that terrified enemies precisely because it looked terrifyingly obsolete, like facing medieval swordsmen in a modern war. But soldiers had complicated feelings about the P-1907. The length was simultaneously its strength and weakness. In close combat, reach advantage was real. 17 inches meant you could stab an enemy before he could stab you with a shorter bayonet. Most bayonet casualties came from charges where defenders broke before contact, or from one-sided actions where defenders had no opportunity to fight back. The long blade's reach advantage mattered in these situations, but critics argued that psychological impact was the real weapon, and a shorter bayonet would provide the same psychological effect with less awkwardness. Alternative approaches developed in the field included soldiers carrying the bayonet detached, using it as a fighting knife rather than mounting it on the rifle. Some units in jungle warfare found the blade useful as a machete substitute, despite not being designed for that purpose. Officers sometimes carried P-1907 bayonets as personal weapons, valuing the blade length for self-defense. The brutal truth is that the P-1907 was obsolete by modern standards from the moment it was designed. 17 inches was excessive for actual combat needs. But British military culture valued tradition, appearance, and psychological impact above modern efficiency. The P-1907 embodied this philosophy. It looked fearsome. It made soldiers feel powerful. It terrified enemies who saw it coming. Those intangible benefits justified the awkwardness and excess length in British military thinking. Production ended in the 1940s, though exact dates vary by contractor. The weapon remained in British service through the 1950s, being gradually replaced by the number 9 bayonet for the L-1A1 rifle. Total production exceeded 10 million units across all manufacturers and decades of production. This makes the P-1907 one of the most produced bayonets in history. Continued service extended far beyond World War II. British forces used P-1907 bayonets. The weapon finally began retirement in the late 1950s as the L-1A1 rifle and shorter number 9 bayonet entered service. Foreign use was extensive across the British Empire and Commonwealth. Canadian, Australian, New Zealand, Indian, and South African forces all used P-1907 bayonets. After independence, many former colonies retained them through the 1960s and beyond. Chinese nationalist forces used British-supplied Lee Enfield rifles with P-1907 bayonets during the Chinese Civil War. Surviving examples number in the hundreds of thousands. The P-1907's massive production and robust construction mean many survived. Military museums worldwide hold examples. Collectors find them readily available. Prices range from £50 to £200, depending on condition, markings, and provenance. Complete examples with original scabbards and clear-dated markings command premium prices. The legacy influenced bayonet design philosophy. While most nations moved toward multi-purpose knife bayonets, the P-1907 demonstrated the result was a weapon that served for 50 years, fought in 2 world wars and dozens of smaller conflicts, and remained feared by enemies who faced it. Not because it was the most practical design, because it looked like death